Chapter 4. Soup. The waves that beat against the timbers of the ship felt wild and powerful. The little ship would run smooth and then suddenly lurch upwards as the water slid underneath it. The rocking and swaying made the failed notions feel very sick, and they all took far longer than Captain Oola would have liked in learning and completing the day's necessary tasks. He had set them to work at once under the supervision of the other sailors. These were a small group who the failed notions learnt were called Bligh, who was the helmsperson, Haidur, who was the rigger and carpenter, Morland, the quartermaster, and Seaward, the boatswain. These were their official roles, though each of these Norsians were skilled enough to chip into each other's duties when they needed to. It was a good thing a healthy sailing ship could function with a surprisingly small crew, since its newest recruits were turning out to be dismal pupils. All of this activity was presided over by Tepid, who stood beside the whipstaff that steered the ship. He was twiddling his thumbs happily with his hands behind his back and staying uncannily upright in the swaying motion. Dominator was beside him, trying to maintain a discussion, though looking thoroughly green.
Sorry, explain that to me again. You're coming with us too?
No, my dear prince, said Tepid. I am not travelling with you.
But you're on the boat too.
Indeed, this is a short, though essential contribution, Tepid explained. We are travelling en route to the Aral Isle, where we are expected to attend an audience with its fair ruler. I believe a short chat with her high ladyship Maemia, the sovereign of the isle, will be most beneficial to your journey ahead.
But shouldn't we just get on with getting to the rain?
Asked Dominator obstinately.
I'd rather get it over and done with.
Well, without the guidance available from the Aral Isle, I believe you would find it very difficult to sort out our precipitation problem. You see... would you like a... There you are. Tepid kindly nudged a handkerchief to Dominator, who suddenly heaved. Ahem, he continued. There is an ancient library on the isle, an archive full of one of the largest collections of history and knowledge in this part of the world. I am of the firmest belief it is vital you fellows get permission to have a nosy in there. Nausea and the Aral Isle have a healthy friendship, and, as Nausea's prince, it is my duty to escort you failed notions there. On the deck below, EA's ears pricked up at the mention of the word library. Careful to appear casual, he edged his way to beneath where the princes stood.
Very noble of you,
mumbled Dominator, clutching the handkerchief. Oh, it's nothing, really, said Tepid. One of these things a prince must do. Once our business upon the Aral Isle is complete, I shall be returning to Nausea. Then I feel your adventure will truly begin.
You're going to that significant meeting after this, you mean?
Asked Dominator.
What's that all about?
There was a yelp from beneath them. EA emerged from underneath, wiping his hair furiously as he went. Tepid smiled and gave Dominator a swift pat on the back. Better into the wind, as they say. Well done.
According to Tepid's plan, it would take them 2 days to reach the Aral Isle and the Lady Maemia. With each passing hour, the sea felt wider than it did before, as the failed notion's world expanded before their eyes. Every once in a while, scattered pieces of land would rise over the encircling horizon, small freckles of rock and heather, with perhaps a fisher person in a salty little house. These were soon left behind, and skyscapes replaced landscapes as the passing day brought stranger clouds heavy with rain that swelled above them. Fealdnor already felt half a world away for Glie. Never in all his life had he travelled so far, except perhaps to the netherworld. He made sure to float at just the right speed to match the progress of the ship. As their journey continued, he grew so used to doing this he didn't have to think about it, even while he slept. He thoroughly disliked the idea of waking up and finding himself hovering above the sea with the ship floating away without him. So he had made sure to put in a concentrated effort to fix the issue as soon as possible. That small detail aside, Glie was in fact beginning to enjoy himself. The winds were cold and sprightly. He could tell from how his friends' faces were turned pink at the edges, and how the gusts whipped through the sails. He liked how the ship would creak and bend in the rise and fall of the swells, how safe it felt in the lower decks, and how he could fly highest of all and act as lookout, a task he hadn't thought of before. His lack of a solid body didn't bother him much these days, and it felt good to know this could be something really useful for him to do. Bligh would spend long hours up in the lookout point, watching the ship slice through the water. The sea had an inexplicable spirit that seemed to resonate with his own, like two notes of a song that harmonized together. It carried them on its back like some huge creature. It was loud, beautiful but fierce, and wild too, and certainly never tame. The Deartháir, on the other hand, were taking longer to adjust to sailors and ships than their ghostly friend. By the time the light had begun to slide from the sky on the first day, Honno was stiff, worn out, and didn't want to have anything to do with Nauseans or adventures or rain for the rest of the evening, as he was sent below to fetch ingredients for that night's meal. "I am sure this is why I don't like adventures," he thought to himself. Everyone likes the idea of adventures, but no one talks about the unwanted extra bits like blisters. He yanked a sack of potatoes out of his way. Or Nauseans. He wrenched out a backpack, but it was stuck in between two boxes. "Who put this stupid thing here?" he grumbled, pulling it open. "Oh, I did." Honno sighed. He knew it was pointless getting wound up. It had been a long day, that was all. He looked back into the bag again and saw some of the food his aunt had forced inside. Something about seeing her handiwork made him feel a bit better. It was like taking a little piece of family with him. Squinting at the contents, he reached into the pack and found the heavy flask jammed in at the top. "This was soup, wasn't it?" he muttered, opening the lid.
"Did you hear something?"
asked Seaward, looking up from the map in the captain's cabin. Captain Oola furrowed his eyebrows.
"Something from below." "Would you like me to check it, sir?"
"The failed notions have only been on board for 6 hours.
"I didn't say it was the field notions."
"You didn't need to."
Seaward grinned as he gave a knowing nod and headed below.
Honno stared at the soup. It stared back. He didn't know what sound he'd just made, but knew he probably would never be able to, or want to, recreate it again. His head was working far too slowly to make sense of what he was seeing. What remained of his thoughts congealed with shock, exhaustion and confusion until the best word for the occasion rose to the surface. "What?"
Put me down, Honno. I want to get out,
said Gina. Honno found himself mechanically placing the flask on the floor. In 3 seconds, what looked like water in a person-shaped bottle had flowed up out of it. In 8 seconds, blue magic had fizzed like bubbles from the tips of dripping fingers. And in less than a minute, Gina was standing by an empty soup flask. She took in the room with a single glance, breathing in a satisfied lungful of ship smells. Then, without a second thought, she strode over to the pile of crates and sacks and began rummaging for clothes. Honno found his mind slowly but steadily regaining control. Indignation was quick to come to his aid, and exasperation soon offered backup. "Do you mind, Gina?" Gina didn't look up.
Mind what?
"Go home!" Honno demanded, forgetting they were at sea and pointing violently out of the porthole. "This is our adventure, not yours." Gina sniggered.
You're not Mum, Honno.
Honno's fists clenched, but he was interrupted by the appearance of Seaward midway down the steps, Haidur behind him. They stopped dead in their tracks at the sight of Gina.
"Oh, who are you?"
she asked at once.
"I'm Gina, and I'm coming too,"
she added before they could answer. Both sailors had become strangely preoccupied with the timber ceiling.
"Oh, yes, I have no clothes,"
Gina continued, utterly unabashed.
"I had some packed somewhere, but I can't find where the bag's gone. Did any of you see a sack that smelt like oats?"
"I think I saw one when we loaded them all on board,"
said Seaward, looking hopelessly at Honno as if he were the interpreter.
Great. Where'd it go?
said Gina, clambering over the luggage, her long brown tail keeping her perfectly balanced.
You could try around the back,
suggested Haidur, not at all sure if he was meant to help or not.
Gina, get down,
Honno hissed through gritted teeth.
In a minute,
said the muffled reply.
Is she going to be a problem?
asked Seaward.
No,
said Gina. Yes, said Honno, speaking at the same time.
I'm not a troublemaker. I'm here to help my cousin,
said Gina happily.
I stowed away in Honno's soup flask, but I had to. Needs must. I'm very helpful, really. Everyone knows it's good to have an extra pair of hands. I'm not clumsy, and I'm good at balancing. See?
She jumped down from the pile of crates, a bundle of clothes in her arms. The sailors might have been impressed if they had seen it, but they had their eyes fixed on the ceiling again. Auntie will be so worried about you, Gina, growled Honno.
Just because I ran onto a knife once doesn't mean I'm going to do something like that again,
she said, shooting a defiant look at Honno.
Besides, it was an accident. Sort of, but it was well-meaning. Oh, and I don't fight or do anything rowdy, by the way.
She showed the sailors her prettiest smile.
I'm above that sort of nonsense.
Way above, muttered her cousin.
You what, Honno?
Gina rounded on him at once.
Are there any more of you coming?
asked Haidur.
Nope, just me,
said Gina cheerfully. Haidur and Seaward nodded reasonably at the wooden beam above them.
We'll leave it to you then. Work hard, supper soon, good night.
The pair turned as one and hastily retreated. They couldn't get back up the ladder quick enough. Whatever they had just seen, whatever was going on, they could explain it to the captain after they had worked it out for themselves. Gina carried on dressing, looking very pleased. Honno continued glaring. The others won't be happy to know you're here.
That's a lie, Honno, and you know it,
said Gina. Do you even know why we're on this mission?
Something to do with the weather, isn't it?
said her voice from under the shirt she was pulling on.
I can help, Honno. You'll see.
Why couldn't you just stay put for 5 minutes? You've barely come back and you've already run away. Have you actually thought about what this will do to Auntie?
She won't mind. She needs the space,
said Gina.
I'm not staying in my room for the rest of my life with my sisters watching me like I'm going to shatter into 1,000,000 tiny pieces. There's no living in that. I'm dying in that house, Honno. Don't make me go back.
She stared at him until he looked away. He was furious, but a small part of him could understand what she meant. This made him even more exasperated. I thought they were watching you because you had a problem with engaging your element.
It's been 4 times since I came back,
said Gina.
Of course I got the hang of it. It's not hard.
Honno frowned. But Betrin told me you turn into a puddle all the time, and EA's been having to come over to the house every other week to fix it. He looked up at her, deeply confused. You mean you've been faking it all along? Oh, Gina, EA's going to be livid when he finds out. But Gina jumped at him, smothering his mouth with her hands.
Shh! You mustn't let EA find out. Don't tell him, Honno. Promise.
Get off, said Honno, shoving her away. Why should I? Gina looked at him as if he'd said something thoroughly unreasonable.
None of your beeswax, that's why.
Honno stared at her, gobsmacked.
Oh, shoestrings and buttercups,
Gina gasped.
What am I doing? I can't turn up solid. I have to be magicked out of the flask. Bother! Now I have to strip again. Sorry, Honno, I haven't got the hang of keeping the clothes dry yet, but I'm getting there. Go fetch EA, tell him the soup needs fixing, and then it will be an amazing surprise.
She looked at him expectantly.
Well, hurry up.
Honno opened his mouth, but words failed him. Eventually, the ridiculousness of the whole thing overwhelmed him. He raised his arms in despair, then stormed up the ladder. Halfway back to the galley, he bumped into EA, who looked up in surprise as Honno thundered past. Go fetch soup, he ordered, scarcely able to force the words out. Soup? Why? asked EA.
It's your problem now. Honno threw himself into his hammock, rolled over, and shut out the world, cousins and all.
Meanwhile, back on solid ground and far beneath the veil of clouds stood the foothills of the Glass Mountains. It was a rough, rocky place, scratched with gorges and troughs hiding chattering streams that ran into waterfalls. The ground was awash with sodden greens, browns and golds as weather-beaten shrubs did their best to flower through the rain. Great swathes of mist were creeping their way down the hillside, with a constant, chilly wind snapping at their heels. 3 people were seated beside a rocky furrow, their cloaks slung over their heads and their noses sunk into a map. They weren't dressed like the rest of the travellers in that area, not that there were many these days anyway. Their clothes were woven with deep reds and purples, and adorned in round silver sequins made of hammered metals. Their long auburn hair was carefully swept out of the way, though limp strands dangled in front of their eyes and dripped onto their map. This map was elaborate and illegible. Age was etched into every crease. After bickering for half an hour, the 3 people had fallen into silent rumination, having all agreed they didn't know where to go. They didn't particularly like being at these low heights either. The air felt too thick, and they still had a long way to travel down the hills. As they continued pondering where they had gone wrong, one happened to glance at the slopes below and spotted a smidgen of movement in amongst the rocks. 2 small figures gradually emerged, clambering around the boulders left from when great ice rivers once ran down from the mountains. It soon became clear they were headed uphill and would pass very near them. After a brief consultation with their companions, one of the trio crawled upright and trotted down the slope to hail the pair. Both looked up quickly as they saw the stranger approaching.
Hello,
said the first doubtfully.
So it's not empty up here after all.
They look fancy, said the second, blinking the rain out of their eyes. Should we run for it?
I'm not running back down the hill,
said the first.
Besides, we haven't seen anyone dressed like that yet. We might be able to sketch them.
The person came to a halt in front of them and bowed politely. The pair exchanged a cautious glance before bowing back. Please forgive me for this unexpected meeting, said the person, panting a little. Myself and my 2 companions are emissaries travelling south on a highly significant errand. They spoke very clearly, but there was a note of something deeper and more ancient embedded in their vowels. Unfortunately, we found ourselves in a place unfamiliar to us, and our maps tell us no better. Do you know this area? The pair looked instantly doubtful, as anyone does when they're asked for directions.
I'm sorry,
said the first guiltily.
We haven't really been here before now. We only know where we've come from.
Now that is a shame, said the emissary. Where are you coming from, may I ask? From Nausea initially, said the second. Though we did stop off in Faildnor to drop in on some friends, but they were out. Now we're on our way to the Glass Mountains. We used to be errand runners, but we quit our job to write our books. We're going to do some research for the ending of our last one, which will be set in the mountains. If we can get there, of course, they added. Oh, you come from Nausea? Asked the emissary, bypassing the books entirely. That is precisely where we are trying to get to. Please, could you tell me how to get there? The ex-errand runners smiled, though privately wishing the emissary could have been a bit more interested in their hobbies.
That's easy,
said the first, pointing across the landscape.
Just keep heading straight down for about 3 miles further southeast. You'll see the plains come into view. In a day and a half, you'll reach them if you keep those hills over there on your left.
Ah! The emissary looked across the misty landscape. That does help. Thank you. Our map told us we would find a small settlement of plainsfolk close to here, but there was nothing. There used to be, nodded one of the ex-errand runners. But they all left and moved back to the flatlands during the war against the Witch of Glass Mountains. The emissary blinked a little and looked about again. We were not aware of these changes.
You didn't know about the war?
Asked the first errand runner, surprised. Oh, we knew about it, said the emissary. We have been above such events. The wind whistled in a sharp gust and took over the conversation. The emissary was taking in the landscape again, as if seeing parts of it anew. The ex-errand runners watched them uncertainly.
What do they mean, above?
Whispered the first.
They must be pacifists,
replied the second. The hazy figures of the other two emissaries were now standing up and watching them curiously. The first emissary turned back to the pair with a grateful smile.
We must be on our way, they said. Thank you for your guidance. If you permit me, your best route to the mountains is further onwards up this path. Then take the left side of the widest gully. It will take several days, but the rest of the way should be clear.
They bowed again, and the ex-errand runners followed suit.
Thank you very much.
Lysander
and Holly, at your service,
they said.
The pleasure is ours, I'm sure,
said the emissary in fluent diplomacy, their companions now descending after them. With a damp flourish and a clink of sequins, they pulled their cloaks about them and began to head on their way. The ex-errand runners exchanged a hesitant glance, then, in a brief burst of courage, called after them.
Sorry, but would you at all mind if we...
Honno was very disappointed to find that the rest of the ATR weren't bothered by the discovery that Gina had come along. Abrian was fascinated with how she had managed to smuggle herself on board. Pippa and Annie wanted to eat her hair, and Morphea had been quietly amused by how much it rattled Honno. Only EA seemed less than happy, and soon disappeared into a small corner, keeping out of the way of everyone. Gina seemed not to mind at the time. She was so swept up by all the activity and excitement. The sailors hadn't dared say a word. All of them were still in a state of shock and apprehension at the idea of failed notions springing from the woodwork. However, by the following day this had worn off enough for them to consign everyone to new and harder tasks. The ship never slept, and needed tending day and night. But despite the Nausians' misgivings, all the failed notions worked as hard as they could. G.A. could hardly believe how events were unfolding. With the sudden arrival of his old friend, he found himself filled with a renewed sense of curiosity about what could be happening between her and E.A. After she'd told him all about her troubles with magic and how E.A. was helping her, G.A. couldn't help but secretly hope. As he floated in a corner with Delilah curled up beside him, and watched Abrian show Gina all their maps, saw his brother keep his nose in some old parchment scrolls, and listened to the sound of the rain all around, G.A. realised he hadn't been this happy in ages.